Hi friends, welcome to JCT. Jim Cantelon today. Always a pleasure to have you with us. Today, by popular demand, we're bringing back Dr. Sasha Hai, who is an internist. But interestingly, on YouTube, which is mainly young viewers, so they tell me, huge hits. As she talks about 4 tips for healthy aging. Go figure. But she's coming back. But then Greg Musselman is joining us this show as well with one of 2 parts interview on what's happening in Syria. He represents Voice of the Martyrs. It's going to be a very full show along with the Bible teaching. Hang in there with us. Now, we've had Dr. Sasha Hai on before, and I have mentioned that we want to have her on again and again. She's an internist from the Credit Valley Hospital in Mississauga. And we've been talking about all kinds of stuff, lifestyle, healthy eating. We're going to, at some point, hear about her own personal story. But today, Sasha, we're talking about healthy aging. Now, I'm very interested in this because even though I've been living in denial for years, I realize that aging is an inexorable process, as my doctor says.
Yeah.
And I'm facing stuff now that I never thought I would face. Is it true for all of us? I mean, sooner or later, we're going to have to cross the Rubicon and admit that we're getting older?
Unfortunately, we are all aging. And I think it's very relevant, especially as the Canadian population is aging. And the reason I want to talk about this is Stats Canada says that in 15 years, so the year 2031, 25% of our population is going to be made up of seniors. So to compare that to about 13% right now. So nearly double how many seniors we have right now in 15 years. And so we need to look at how are we going to age in health so that we can, really maximize those years ahead of us.
Now, you've come with 4 key hints for how to age in a healthy way. What would hint number 1 be?
Yeah, so I wanted to look at healthy behaviors. So the first
healthy
one is
behavior?
Behaviors.
Yeah.
So the first one is eating in a healthy way. And what does that look like with the changes that come upon our bodies as we age? So with aging comes a decrease in our basal metabolic rate. So it's pretty much a linear relationship with age and your metabolic rate. And what that means, Jim, is that as you're aging, you don't need to eat as much as, say, when you were 25.
Right.
So with aging, there's a decrease in the amount of skeletal muscle that you have. And the less lean body mass made out of skeletal muscle that you have, the less calories or the less energy you need to sustain your body. And the problem is if you continue to eat the same way you've always eaten year after year, inevitably you're going to gain weight, and that tends to be unhealthy fat that is around the midsection that can lead to many of the chronic illnesses associated with aging. So there's pretty widespread consensus in aging research that eating less actually leads to longer and healthier lives.
I've actually read that a low-calorie diet over decades actually contributes to longevity. I guess the question is, who wants to live that way? I mean,
that is a good point.
I mean, really, am I going to imprison myself into always being hungry so that I can, spend 5 more years in the nursing home?
Yeah, well, that's just it, though. We're trying to avoid, the only reason you might end up in a nursing home is if you were no longer able to care for yourself.
Right.
And that's not necessarily how everyone ages. So we want to try to incorporate healthy behaviors so that you can live independently as long as possible in a healthy way and still enjoy it, of course.
Now, healthy eating in terms of behaviors, are there other aspects to healthy behavior before we go to point number 2?
So point number 2 would be my second behavior.
What's number 2?
Yeah, so my second behavior is looking at physical activity. And we say this all the time, we need to eat less, we need to move more, but especially with aging, we need to address maintaining our physical health. And, there's that saying that if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And that's very, very true as we age. So there's been studies that have shown that with aerobic exercise, there was a randomized control trial that looked at seniors doing aerobic exercise. And what I mean by that is, what you think of as cardio. So something that drives up your heart rate. And what they found is over a 1-year span, those who did aerobic exercise actually had larger hippocampal volumes. So your hippocampus is the area of your brain that helps with memory storage. And improved memory in these seniors who did aerobic exercise. So it's very, very important. It helps with maintaining your cognitive maintaining cognition. And secondly, we talked about skeletal muscle. So one of the things you can do to kind of counterbalance the loss of skeletal muscle that comes with aging is to do resistance exercise. So something that's going to build muscle. That could be using your own body weight to build muscle. It could be, lifting weights at the gym or using resistance bands. But those are very important with aging, because if you don't use those muscles, you will continue to lose those muscles.
And it seems to me that, and I think you're going to talk about falling here in a minute, but often seniors fall and break hips and stuff.
Yep.
If they had the muscular strength to catch themselves when they trip, then the fall would not occur and the broken hip would not occur, right?
You were bang on.
Plus, doesn't weightlifting also help with bone density?
Yes, you are absolutely right. I'm glad that you brought those 2 points up. That's very much what I wanted to speak to as well, that one of the things you can do to prevent falls and injury that you alluded to is maintaining your muscle mass. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, what's number 3?
Number 3 is addressing falls. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because falls are one of the major sources of injury and disability in the elderly. And there are things that you can do to reduce the risk of falls. And the problem with falls is that they often will cause this whole downstream cascade of unfortunate events. So you have a fall, and then it affects your mobility, it affects your quality of life. You may end up with chronic pain, and 40% of falls in seniors actually lead to hip fractures. And we know from the medical literature that hip fractures carry a very high mortality rate associated with them within the first year. So we want to avoid all of that, right?
And why is that? You wouldn't think a hip was critical to sustaining of life. Is it because it's sort of the first step in a slippery slope of other problems that emerge?
Exactly. So someone comes into the hospital with a hip fracture. Some are operable, so they go for their surgery, but then maybe they have difficulties with mobility after, and then they lie in a hospital bed, and then they get hospital-acquired pneumonia, and then all of these subsequent events that really increase their mortality.
As a pastor, and I've been a pastor as well as a broadcaster for 45 years. I can't believe it. Almost 46. Time and time again, people go in with pneumonia. Often they're elderly and they have other issues, and you think, well, pneumonia, it'll pass. But it's pneumonia that kills them. It seems to prey on those who are in a weakened condition or vulnerable in some way.
Yeah, when you become frail, your body just doesn't have the same defense mechanisms. It's true.
Now, what about the defense mechanisms? It's maybe not in your behavioral points here, but is there a way of keeping your defense mechanisms at a premium? How do you do it?
So physical activity is one thing that has been shown to, your heart stays healthy, your lungs stay healthier. There is a lower risk of all of those chronic medical conditions like diabetes that can precipitate many other problems. So all the more reason to try to stay physically active. And what I would say to viewers is, you might not be elderly, but you have a grandmother or you have a parent who is. And if you are going to visit, that one way to encourage physical activity would be to take them for a walk or to take them to an aquafit class or something that they can manage. Because one of the barriers to seniors being physically active is social isolation or lack of confidence to go out for a walk themselves because they are afraid of falling. So if you're going to visit an older family member, it's one way to encourage them to get out is to join them.
Point number 4.
Point number 4 is, actually I was just kind of speaking to it, is maintaining your social network.
Social network.
So many studies have shown that seniors who have more of a social network have better sense of well-being, better perception of their health, better quality of life. And there's a lot of risk factors that would make people socially isolated. So retirement, you're no longer going to work every day, you're kind of sitting at home by yourself, not knowing what to do with yourself, and all of a sudden you're very socially isolated. So ways to balance that would be volunteerism. So there's a lot of seniors who get involved in volunteer work, and studies who've looked at volunteers also show that they do feel more connected. They're getting out every day and having a network of people around them. Or family becomes very, very important to maintain social connectedness as well.
Is there a degree of ageism out there? Discrimination against those who are senior? Talking down to them, there, dear, with the underlying message that, really you've been marginalized by age. And I really wonder if, as people age, they don't even impose that kind of mindset on themselves. What I'm hearing from you is just get out there and embrace life.
Yeah, and I think that, just because someone's in their senior years and they've finished work, it doesn't mean that they don't have such a valuable contribution to society. And, Health Canada actually came up with a framework for healthy aging, and that one is something that they talk about in it, is that idea of ageism, and really wanting to encourage seniors to get out, to be an active part, whether it's through volunteering or continuing to work, because seniors do have so much to contribute.
I'm watching, as we speak, the ongoing dramas surrounding the U.S. election. Hillary Clinton's 69, Donald Trump is 69, almost 70. Bernie Sanders is 74. And these are people who in other contexts would be marginalized in a sense because of their age, and yet they're just coming into their own.
Right, they're very well seasoned, and just look at the years that they have behind them and all that they have to offer and all of the wisdom that they have to offer. And I think that that's something we need to encourage, and why we want to keep our seniors healthy so that we can benefit from all of that.
So, eat well, stay physically active, try to mitigate falling, and keep engaged with your friends and family.
That's right.
Wisdom from Sasha High, from Sasha on High. And we'll look forward to hearing more from her as future programs unfold.
Very few African mothers ever see a doctor or midwife, yet each mother knows how fragile her child's life is. You see, 26,000 children under the age of 5 will die today because they don't have access to medical care. Your gift of $260, just $22 every month, helps stock a mobile clinic and train healthcare workers to care for young mothers and their children during pregnancy and preschool years. Join WOW Mother Care now. Protect the life of a mother and her child.
Back again with Greg Musselman, voice of the Martyrs, VP, who knows the world like very few Canadians know the world, not the least of it being Syria. Greg, the whole world is getting to know Syria, and it's not a pretty picture, it's not a happy story. It's an ongoing story, a flood of refugees like we haven't seen since the Second World War. When I lived in Israel, Syria was a fairly quiescent country, a few conflicts on the Golan Heights, but nothing to speak of. Now, the whole world knows about Syria. How does Voice of the Martyrs factor in?
Well, of course, we work with persecuted Christians, and definitely there are many Christians being persecuted. Now, when you talk about Syria, of course, there's the flood of 11 million people have been displaced, 4 million have left the country, 250,000 have been killed, and 25, 30,000 are now in Canada. And some of we've helped a little bit, like not Voice of the Martyrs so much, but Canadians and others that I'm working with to try to get some of the Christians into Canada. Now, what's happened is because we work with a ministry that is with persecuted Christians, we've already been working there already. And we have contacts and people that we work with in the country, Muslim country, persecution was happening. When ISIS came in, Islamic State, and started to cause havoc, now they're killing Muslims, they're killing everybody, but they are targeting Christians. So even though it's, Christians are not the only ones being targeted, that's our emphasis.
No, IS targets Christians. They make no distinction between evangelical and Roman Catholic.
No.
Do you make any distinction?
No, not really, because they're people of the cross. And because they are suffering, we will help them. One of the interesting things, and you know this, many studies over the last number of years have said that more Muslims have become Christians the last 20 years than probably the previous 1,500 years of Islam. What I found, and I heard many of those stories and could tell you many of those stories, it's amazing what God is doing in the Muslim world. And I do believe that's tied into, as the Spirit of God is being poured on all of flesh, this rise up of this real Islamic militancy. But with the many of the historic Christians not really understanding what a personal relationship with Christ meant. So when they come to places like Amman, Jordan, or Beirut, Lebanon, it's the Christians that are reaching out in those places, not only to the Christians, but to the Muslims as well. But, so the Christians are hearing the gospel. It's kind of a sense of, well, what do you mean they're hearing the gospel? But they really were not understanding it back in Syria. which of course has a long church history, and so many of them were coming to a personal relationship with Jesus.
What were they? They were Christians, but they were cultural Christians?
Yeah, I would say more cultural Christians.
Which
sure.
means what?
Well, they were they maybe went to the church, they maybe read the Bible a little bit. They were known as Christians, but they may or may not. It's like what happens in Canada. We'd call maybe nominal Christian, somebody that goes to church at Easter and at Christmas time.
But when I lived in Israel, it's very clear that if you're Jewish, it's because you're born Jewish. If you're Muslim, it's because you're born Muslim. If you're Christian, it's because you're born Christian.
That's true.
Would that same cultural principle apply in Syria?
Sure, absolutely.
What about the Alawites?
Well, again, that's a whole other part with the Shia Islam and being a sect of that, and they're considered heretics. I mean, that's the thing about Syria. You've got so many factions. You don't know. When I hear on the news that ISIS has been pushed out of a town, a stronghold, from ISIS, but it's the government's doing it. Well, the rebels are kind of the good guys, but not the good guys, and the government, and it's such a mix.
Are the Christians not conflicted because Bashar Assad, the president of Syria, is an Alawite, and he's been pretty soft on Christians?
He's been great. I mean, same as look what happened in Iraq.
Hussein, he was.
Yeah, it's not that they like Christians or agree with them. As long as you stay in your buildings and don't evangelize, then you're okay. And that's why, and at the beginning I was a little confused when I started hearing the reports. Well, why are the Christians supporting the government? Well, it's because the government protected them. But again, it goes back to as long as you're not doing evangelism, and the people that we work with and our partners, again, our ministry, Voice of the Martyrs, we're not a refugee organization. That would sink us real fast. We believe and help or whatever individually, but we are supporting people like a lady we'll call Deborah. She's an evangelist in Syria and almost got blown up because, she's decided to stay, was at a check stop and a rocket came in. Her family is in France begging her to come out. She's staying there because the people are traumatized. When these kinds of things happen, you get many of the Muslims questioning what is Islam? Is ISIS really Islam? And then you've got the Christians that are fleeing or the ones that are staying and saying, God has called us here.
Next time, Greg, I want to ask you about that very thing, the impact of ISIS, the unexpected impact in terms of people coming to Christ. Voice of the Martyrs, Greg Musselman, back with more right after this, friend.
This is a Voice of the Martyrs Canada news update, a special report.
More than 200,000 Syrians have lost their lives in 4+ years of armed conflict. About a quarter of them were Christians. Prior to the uprising and then the war, there were about 3 million Christians in the country. About half of them have left, and most of the rest want to leave as well.
It breaks my heart to see what is happening to my nation with all the terrorism and the violence among the people.
If you would have come to Syria before, you would have seen how it was full of churches and beautiful Christian places, and now it's all gone. It's all destroyed.
Amani was encouraged by the concern and support of the Voice of the Martyrs Canada, but is pleading with Christians everywhere to continue to pray.
For more information, visit www.vomcanada.com.
We're now at John chapter 18, and we've taken a lot of time with 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, as we should. It's a very passionate description by this young John in his observations, not young when he wrote it, but of the events that surrounded the last few hours of Jesus' life, focusing on the upper room. And it's great insight into what the disciples did and, more interestingly, didn't know about Jesus. And it culminates in this high priestly prayer of John 17. But now we're into the events that precipitate his arrest and his, you might call it, trial's hardly the word. It was a kangaroo court. And then his crucifixion and resurrection. So we're really into what's called the Passion of Christ. Okay, John 18, when he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples, crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now, when we talk garden here in North America, we sometimes are thinking vegetables. In most of the world, and certainly in that part of the world, it's more like a park. It's not a place where you grow celery. It would be a kind of a walled-off area that was a peaceful place for rest and reflection. providing some respite for the harried citizens of Jerusalem. Now, I'm not an architect. I know they do elevations. I'm not an artist either. But if you look from south to north up the Kidron Valley, you've got the walls of the city here, and it comes to the meeting of the west-east elevation, and then you've got the north-south, and then it goes down into the Kidron Valley like this. Now, the Kidron Valley in Jesus' time would have been about 60 feet lower than it is today. And the reason it's higher today is because of the several times the walls of Jerusalem have been raised, the rocks thrown down in the valley, and then slowly, a new civilization builds on the rubble of the past. And there was a brook, and a brook is the best word. We'd call it a creek in the bottom of the Kidron Valley that in most cases was dry, but during times of intense rain, it might fill up a bit. And then the valley comes up, and it sort of has a bit of a terrace, and then it goes steeply up to the Mount of Olives. Now, the Garden of Gethsemane was in this area right here, the terrace. And to get there, and Kathy and I have walked it on several occasions, is quite an arduous trek down in the valley and then up to this area that is walled in, and today has olive trees that are over 2,000 years of age. Now, in Jesus' time, they would have been saplings. But it's really something to go there and see these trees that go right back to the time of Christ. And it could very well be that Jesus sat in the shade of those young olive trees. But that's the garden we're talking about here. Jesus used to go there to pray. All right? Now, let's get back to the scripture. Now, Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Now, you say, what? Weapons? Why would they have weapons? Jesus was not leading some kind of insurrection. He didn't have a bunch of brigands or insurgents. They did have a sword, which we'll see in a minute, and that in itself is a bit of a mystery. But nevertheless, this band of ne'er-do-wells comes to get Jesus under the guidance of Judas. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" Now, he knew who they wanted, but he's doing it for their sake, not for his. He wanted to make sure they know who they're after. Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. Now, Jesus of Nazareth, why Jesus of Nazareth? Because there were so many Jesuses in those days. Yeshua was a very common name. In fact, in Hispanic cultures to this day, you often see football players, baseball players, especially baseball players whose name is Jesus, right? Very common name. So they want to make sure, that they've got the right guy. So it's Jesus of Nazareth. To this day, by the way, Christians are referred to in Israel as Notzrim, which means from Nazareth, all right? "I am he," Jesus said. And Judas, the traitor, was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Now, I checked this out because I was fascinated in this. Falling to the ground face first, prostration, in other words, very common. In fact, even to this day, you'll see Muslim men, as they're worshiping, either facing Mecca or in one of their mosques, down on their faces. That's a very common posture of prayer in the Middle Eastern context. But I checked it out not only in the Greek language. I'm not very good in Greek, but I've got enough helps that I can get there. But also a few church historians. This was falling backwards. This is like somebody had slugged them in the jaw. Of course, nobody had. But it just gives you a little indication of the power, that emanated from Christ. And it was a power that was certainly under a great deal of self-limitation. So, again, he asks them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. He said, "I told you I'm he. If you're looking for me, then let these men go." And he's referring, of course, to his own disciples who he was concerned about. And John says, this happened so that the words he'd spoken would be fulfilled. I've not lost one of those you gave me. He was very protective of his disciples. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword. Now, this guy's a fisherman. What's he doing with a sword? You know, kind of like some of us in North America who have a hidden gun. He drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Now, Peter wasn't looking to cut off the guy's ear. He was looking to cut off the guy's head. And he swung at him, and the guy probably ducked, you know, and the sword sliced by and got his ear instead of his head. And John happens to mention this guy's name was Malchus. And Jesus commanded Peter, put your sword away, shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? Now, this is quite intriguing. It's maybe the first time in your life or your reading of the scripture you've even noticed that there was a sword in the story. Well, going back to Luke 22, and you need to do that with your own Bible, all right? You have Luke's account of the Last Supper and then this arrest in the garden that follows. But as they're prepping, you know, to go to the Garden of Gethsemane, the disciples say, see, Lord, here are 2 swords. And Jesus was telling them, if you have a purse, take it, also a bag. If you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. What? Why would you? That's what Luke says. It's written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. I tell you, this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. The disciples said, see, Lord, here are 2 swords. That's enough, he replied. We need to talk more about this. Our time is up for this study, but next time we'll pick it up there.
Very few African mothers ever see a doctor or midwife, yet each mother knows how fragile her child's life is. You see, 26,000 children under the age of 5 will die today because they don't have access to medical care. Your gift of $260, just $22 every month, helps stock a mobile clinic and train healthcare workers to care for young mothers and their children during pregnancy and preschool years. Join WOW Mother Care now. Protect the life of a mother and her child.
So I'm learning how to age gracefully, according to Dr. Sasha High. But I'm also fascinated that Musselman talked about the targeting of Christians by ISIS and the correlative, the Christians reaching out to help refugees. You know, the faith that we have in Christ is a profound faith. It's not just a matter of personal salvation. It's a matter of becoming the hands and feet of Jesus and reaching out to those who are in need. So kudos to the Syrian Christians. Thanks for watching. Back again next time. Bye for now.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon today. P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario. L7R 3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click Support.